Today, I would like to share from one of my favorite teachers ever, who was so impactful to me. His name is John Bradshaw. You can find numerous videos from him on YouTube. And he talks about how to just rediscover the divine child. Now, rediscover does not mean discover. Discover is kind of like uncover, but like bring it out. Rediscover means that it was put into something, and now we're taking away the something. So it's already been discovered, it's being rediscovered. So the child is the source of regeneration, and the wonder child is the most creative aspect of our being, and the part that bears the most likeness to our creator. And we know this from how people talk about a baby that is totally satisfied, at ease, and just wants to be smiled at, looked at, feel held, feel comfortable with temperature, and be fed as liquidy and as easy digestible, and just wants touch time and wants to laugh and just is not yet offended by anything. It doesn't have a personality. So our task is to use this force to transform our lives into unique works of art. That's the idea, that a baby can become anything. So life is regeneration, forever unfolding. It's a becoming. And there's a quote here which is, "The need to find the child is part of an ancient human longing. Behind our individual past lies our cultural past, contained in many myths. In myths, we see the child as the offspring of a union with the divine. It is the mythical child we seek, as well as the child of our personal history." And life is about, that's a quote from him. Life is about expanding consciousness in all directions. The wonder child has this spark. But part of growing up is learning to adapt to a culture. Culture, I'm going to use a scientific way of saying it because this is how I understand it. A culture in a lab is something that you've grown. You culture whichever bacteria you want, fungus, nutrients, and whatever organisms, even human cell tissues, are in cultures. And that's where we get our ideas of medicines. And then cultured yogurt, culture. Culture means like to steep into, to marinate it, right? To bring it up in the environment. So a culture is like, we have to adapt to the culture, to our nurture and culture, that to me are very similar. Like the environment, the ambiance, the vicinity, the container inside of which to survive. So there's an ego or a fault self, which is not a default. It's a self that has to emerge. It's a socio-cultural, like social, like it's a culture to relate inside of that culture, because the most desperate thing for a baby, for anyone, is to feel disconnected, is not to be able to make contact. So in this culture, we learn socio-cultural conditioning, like think of conditioner, it gets in. So these words are very important: conditioning, culture, and social. That self that's been steeped in culture, whatever culture, whether it's a culture of addiction, culture of love, culture of organic, culture of business, and whatever the family, the religion, the community decided, that culture was before we were born. That was what was right, and that's how it's supposed to be. And this, when John Bradshaw was sharing this in mainstream world, and even the word mainstream, where all the rivers come together, he was sharing it in such a way that it's not esoteric, weird information. This is for everyone. So this is because, he says unexamined life is really not worth living. And what is my difference that makes the difference? What makes the difference that makes it worth living? What gives value? We all have to kind of kill our mothers and fathers inside of us, because when we leave our home and we grow into the unique person we are, we can no longer fit in that culture. We can no longer fit in the subculture, in the private, personal culture of our family. Or it doesn't have to be actual father and mother, the caregivers, caretakers that nurtured us, that social self, to be the ego that we have to survive. And what they told us about us is a projection of their own inner children. Our parents were talking about how they saw us through their eyes, which means a divine child is unusual birth or origin, extraordinary, and the old order is threatened. The child has to be hidden. There's uniqueness that has the power to cause the parents, don't be the way you are, and we feel exiled. So if they're doing all that, their inner child is sort of we all have those obstacles, and all of us have to be heroes. We all have the possibility of owning who we are, our full-fledgedness, and the existentialism is the adult child. So our parents not knowing the value of their existence and not knowing the value of our existence, we had to do so much instead of just exist. And that's the idea of the lowly origins to the self-knowledge of inherent uniqueness, divinity, extraordinariness, which everybody craves, everybody wants. That's the wonder of the world. That's the, however long we're here, not rushing the process. Being forced to leave or to be left, we're forced to be left, is ultimately a blessing for people like us who become easily dependent for the long run, because there's this Kafkaesque shame of original sin. Like there's something fundamental, like it's an indictment without a stain, with like a stain on us, and we don't know why. We were like born into it. We're born into a culture where we're automatically not able to exist as we are. Even the baby has a lot of work these days. Not these days. What I mean is that even in this general culture, in the Western society of factory mindset, where there's existentialism obviously plaguing the adult children and everybody that has anxiety and depression. More importantly, the lack of purpose, the lack of meaning. So, there's a sense that there's a lot of work to be done right when you're born. And in order to be that's kind of not in line with the natural work, the natural work of actually living. It takes work. It takes work to survive. It takes work to do all that. And then when we don't know how to drive a car, it's like childlike. And I'm putting myself in that because I don't drive. It's like I'm not ready to do this responsibility. So that's kind of like the work. When we had to do that as a very young age, we had to learn not necessarily how to drive a car, but we weren't allowed to be childlike as a child. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. That children have to perform and do service, and it creates an adult child. So traumas and shames have phases, and the failures are part of the ego death. So each time we fail to be the version of us we think is perfect, that's like killing the inner father and mother that were keeping us in that culture. Again, I'm not talking about real father and mother. I'm talking about the pain is the liberator, that the old order was threatened by us and our uniqueness to our parents, but actually the inner parent that continues to threaten us for being ourselves. And we have to go into hiding. There's an elemental life of not letting ourselves shine. It's like pieces. It's not the light shining through. It's like, okay, you could shine until here, shine until here, in this situation, there. But we have to transcend this through really like a rebellion, which is the higher self pushing forward. And every addict is in a spiritual emergency, trying to transcend, find ecstasy, trying to get greater, but doesn't know how, trying to do something greater. And once we go through the original pain, this is why John Bradshaw is so valuable. He says you can go through the original pain of killing that version of you that never got to live because of it, that version of you that never allowed you to live. And it's not necessarily the parents, but we rebel against that. Instead of rebelling on the outside, we rebel on the inside. And we rebel against this pattern of constantly seeking ecstasy, constantly seeking something valuable, as if it's never enough, as if we don't even exist. And that's how we have to have that ego, some kind of ego boundary, because once we go through the original pain, there's an uncovering, there's a legitimizing of the suffering. Wow, we could see ourselves, and that's the first moment where we have an inner parent resource, because we're sourcing the source in order to say, I was meant to be who I was supposed to be all along. We can begin to make sense of the light. That's why it was so painful to push the light down, to try to not be light, to try to find someone else to tell us what to think. And then it's self-destructive at times. So more than anyone can define, we're more than that. We also have to keep the knowledge that there is a place within where I'm the only one who's going to know who I am. There's a place within where I am the only one who am going to know who I am. And I would say that I agree with this. And he said, we have to remember, I don't want to be a survivor, a multi-generational accident, an adult child abandoned, guarding. I want to move toward creativity. This is what each of us chooses with our ego boundary being released. It's like a false edge. It's a false edge. And so as we release this false edge of ourself, that was from this, I want to give a great image, which is a fish in a fish tank. You give it a small bowl and you only fill the bowl halfway. The fish won't go up. Then you fill the whole thing up. The idea is that the fish needs to learn. We need to be the fish that learns that now we have a whole bowl. Now, what if you put that fish in an aquarium? A big, big fish tank, like a glass, big, huge rectangle. I grew up with some of this. Then this fish now has to learn that it's not in a tiny culture anymore. It has room to swim and play. And now we're going to learn about what prompts us to change. Why do we refuse to go into the whole big space we have? Something was always pushing us to regenerate, overcome. And, empowerment is really choosing our own life. It's choosing. It's not the urgency that I just talked about. And it's not either the fitting in that we talked about. And it's not rebelling on the outside either. It's making choices. Choice is empowerment, real power. That's creativity, that's empowerment. So what prompts us to change if pain is our greatest teacher? It's no longer wanting to act out the family history or the pattern, and we can start looking at the ways strength comes to us and the places in the heart that don't yet exist. There's not yet love there, there could be love there. And the pain must be in order that they be coming into being. The last thing I'll say for today, and there's a lot more and I'll share tomorrow, is that the more spiritual and conscious we become, the more we begin to understand that life, the paradox really, that life is tragic. We have to make meaning out of our life, that life is tragic, and there's an ambivalent nature. It's almost impersonal. Ambivalent to me, which could be anything, is ambivalent, like ambidextrous. You could use either hand. Ambivalent, it could revolve in any way. It's ambivalent. It's not necessarily going one way or the other way. And it comes from valence, which is like surround. So I think of valence electrons, which are revolving around the atom. But really, like, there's a nature of life, including my life and your life, that is kind of impersonal. We can actually reframe that and capitalize on it and stop making such strong edges that this is good, this is bad, this is how I should be, this is how you should be, this is how it should be, based on our inner culture programming. And instead, in the spiritual consciousness, feeling the pain of going past an edge, that it is tragic to both grow and break through at the same time. And that's a paradox. In Kabbalah, I learned that as the paradox. We can capitalize on that. We can actually get on our, how does he say it? He says, this is an unprecedented opportunity for creativity. So the worst moment is an unprecedented opportunity for creativity. And I will stop there and, God willing, continue with this amazing stuff tomorrow. Thank you. Be well.